My name is Elsy Sainna. I'm the Executive Director at the ICJ Kenya. That is the International Commission of Jurists, which is the Kenyan chapter. ICJ Kenya is the leading human rights organization, not only in Kenya, but also in the region. We are a rule of law organization championing human rights, justice, and democratic governance in Kenya and Africa. So what are our thoughts as ICJ with respect to this year's theme that, it says invest to prevent violence against women and girls, and what is our sense of perspective of the state, the current state of gender-based violence? For ICJ Kenya, looking at the statistics, I think we're a bit alarmed that there's still increasingly gender-based violence is actually not reducing. In fact, it's manifesting itself in different forms, whether it is within the home setting, the private setting, or whether it is within the cultural practices in Kenya, the FGM statistics, the domestic violence cases, the violence against elderly women. We get that reported severally in the newspapers, and even data is being collected where elderly women are threatened because of, they're accused of being witches, for example. In hospitals, violence that are really attributed to pregnant women during, their reproductive health rights being held up in hospitals for failure of paying bills. And you see that it is mainly a lot of physical violence, but there is emotional and psychological violence that is meted against women. Also from the mental health statistics, we are seeing increasingly a lot of violence is meted against women who are experiencing mental health challenges. So overall, our sense is that more needs to be done to protect women and girls against gender-based violence, not only in the public sphere, but also in the private sphere. I mean, if you look at the statistics, it says 1 to 3 women in Kenya have experienced violence, 18% boys. So it means women and girls potentially are likely to experience some sense of gender-based violence in their everyday work. So now there's protection at the private sphere and protection even in the public sphere. But the public is a state obligation to protect women both within the private sphere and the public sphere, so that it doesn't amount to what we call at ICJ Kenya cruel and degrading treatment, which is a violation of human rights, because gender-based violence is a violation of women's rights, but also a violation of dignity of the person, whether it's a woman or a girl. So we are excited about the launch of the gender-based violence courts by the judiciary. In June this year, the Chief Justice launched the gender-based violence courts that could then address the unique needs of women and girls or persons who experience GBV within the criminal justice chain and within the courts. The courts are a bit more sensitive, so there's no double trauma, or particularly victims, and perpetrators are then held to account, because issues of evidence and prosecution of the cases in terms of what evidence is to actually secure conviction were increasingly getting difficult when you lump gender-based violence cases together with any other criminal justice case. So which means that we appreciate the judiciary prioritizing the unique needs of gender-based violence persons who come in contact with the law, but more because it's really about women and girls. 80% of the victims in court regarding gender-based violence are women and girls. So we appreciate the court and laud the court for that great initiative. The other thing that we need to do is to really strengthen the legal and policy frameworks in Kenya. We've seen, for example, the penal code is currently under review. We're excited about that. But also we know that the penal code itself does not provide so much exhaustively the crimes that were given when somebody is violated or has a gender-based violence issue. So the penal code, in our view, as ICJ Kenya, is limited, and it could do with further review, even as the reforms of the criminal justice sector, the criminal justice bill, the penal code bill that is before the House at the moment. I think more could be done to comprehensively expand the scope of gender-based violence, which as ICJ we are championing under the Decriminalizing of Petty Offences Act, but also through the other legislations around the right to health, which is then concerns women and health issues. So we'd like to see some of our recommendations go up to that. Also would like that the Sexual Offences Act really begins to really tackle the issue of marital health, REP. For us at ICJ Kenya, we are still increasingly concerned that, you know, the Act does not define marital rape, yet it is a form of gender-based violence. And globally and regionally, it has been recognized that it is a form of gender-based violence. So then Kenya must, catch up and meet up with the rest of the world by ensuring that it factors in, intimate partner violence, particularly marital rape, in our statutes. The Protection Against Domestic Violence Act of 2015 for us, we've looked at it also at ICJ, and we're suggesting that, you know, could expand the scope of the, you know, specific penalties attributed to violence that is described in that law. It seems vague. It could be more specific so that when anybody is charged or brought before the law under that particular legislation, then there's corresponding penalties that are clear, as much as they're clear in the Sexual and Offences Act, and so also for the, for the Protection Against Domestic Violence, for example. And we could do with strengthening the protection and the prohibition of female genital mutilation. I think it's time we reviewed that law alongside other international human rights treaties, for example, the Convention Against Torture, cruel and degrading treatment. Is it time we begin to have conversations around FGM and the import it has on, gender-based violence in terms of, being cruel and degrading and really affecting the dignity of women? Maybe that's a discourse we need to have. But also, again, having a more robust campaign for us at ICJ. Part of some of the penal provisions that we are requesting to review is the death penalty, complete abolition of the death penalty. And we'll discuss more about that, because from our statistics, a lot of the women that are incarcerated for murder or capital offenses, and if they are women, it's really cases around gender-based violence, whether they have been affected, whether they've murdered their partners out of crime of passion or, self-protection. So that way, because there's an element of death, then they attract the death penalty. But nobody goes to look behind the circumstances which really occurred to get the woman to be convicted for that particular crime. And we are finding at ICJ that we need to spotlight that. It's really about the root cause is gender-based violence. So we are saying that spotlight some of those areas that really convict women for high-level crimes, but really are about gender-based violence. So those are the raft of ideas in terms of the laws. In terms of policy, we'd like to see the strengthened mechanisms. We have the Polycare that was established within by the National Police Service. It's supposed to have a gender desk. It's supposed to be gender responsive to gender-based violence related cases, particularly sexual and gender-based violence cases that come before the police stations. Would like to see that rolled out more, and it is popularized better, and how the information is collected or the evidence preserved, what we call the chain of custody, is better. It's better held so that we get more proper convictions or proper, cases in court, so that we're able to really eradicate what we're beginning increasingly to call at ICJ the epidemic of gender-based violence, particularly sexual and gender-based violence in Kenya.